Hello, everyone. It is a real pleasure to be here with this august group. This is fantastic. I'm looking forward very much to speaking with you. I have had some association with students who are chaplain candidates at Brigham Young University. I see several of them here. Great group. And then, of course, Blake Boatwright and Vance Theodore are just fantastic members of our faculty. Love our association with the Boatwrights and the Theodores. And let's see if that's working. Fantastic. There's only one bit of biographical information you need to know about me. I come from Hooper, Utah. How many by show of hands have heard of Hooper, Utah? All right, how many of you have not heard? Let's just kind of compare. Okay, good. Well, your lucky day, my friends. This knowledge is going to open doors for you. Hooper, Utah is one of those places that, when you just drop that in a casual conversation and doors open. So Hooper's about 40 miles north of here and on the shores of the Great Salt Lake, this beautiful beachfront community, a lot like San Diego. Probably the thing that we receive the most grief for. If you do know Hooper, you know that we're sometimes the butt of a lot of jokes, probably because we insist on pronouncing our name so strangely. So if you look at this, you'd expect Hooper, but we always say, you look in a book and find Hooper, you don't look in a book and find Hooper. So you remember that little aphorism, and you're going to do really well. The thing that we would say about this idea of Hooper is it's hard when you're from a small town. Maybe some of you relate to this. You have an inferiority complex, so you just have this sort of compulsion to talk about it, and here I am. So, but let me give you an illustration of why it's so difficult. The Weber County Sheriff, Hooper's in Weber County, Utah. The Weber County Sheriff, a few months ago, was looking for a new deputy, and so he sent out a call for applicants, and 3 applicants from Hooper actually applied for the job. The sheriff had heard that people from Hooper weren't the brightest, but he wanted to have an open mind, so he wanted to give them a fair chance. So he called in the first applicant from Hooper, and he showed this applicant a profile photo, so a photo from the side of the head, and said, "Okay, here's your suspect. What are you looking for?" And the first applicant from Hooper said, I'm looking for a man with one eye." The sheriff said, "Well, he has 2 eyes. This is just a profile photo. It's only showing half of his head." Calls in the second applicant, shows him the same photo, says, "Okay, this is your suspect. What are you looking for?" The second applicant from Hooper says, "I'm looking for a man with 1 ear." The sheriff says, "He has 2 ears. This is just showing half his face." So now the sheriff is losing hope. He's now thinking that people from Hooper really are all that he's heard they are or are not. And he calls in the third applicant, shows him the same photo, and says, "Pretend this is your suspect. What are you looking for?" And the third applicant from Hooper says, "I'm looking for a man wearing contacts." And the sheriff said, "That's brilliant. How did you deduce just from this photo that he's wearing contacts?" And the third guy from Hooper said, "Easy. He's only got 1 ear, 1 eye. How's he supposed to wear glasses?" That's the sort of abuse we have to put up with where I come from. That's not exactly a true story, but there are enough parallels. There's enough truth therein it's a worthy illustration of our problems. But I always think of that little story when thinking about paradigm shifts, and that's what I really want to talk with you about is something of a paradigm shift that it's sort of characterized my life, and I'm going to guess for many of you when we think about interfaith dialogue, and it's this idea of moving from one angle of view where it's something we've seen from the same point of view over and over, to moving from a different point of view and seeing that there's new depth and new dimension and more than we realized was originally part of the picture. That kind of idea of a paradigm shift, and that's what's happened to me with interfaith dialogue. I can't think of a group that is probably more in tune with interfaith dialogue, both vocationally and dispositionally, than this group. So in a lot of ways, I hope that we'll have time, and I want to learn from you. I want you to reflect on some of your experiences, because you are in this, you are doing this, and so I recognize that, and am looking forward to all that I can learn from you in our few minutes together. What I'd like to think about to start, though, is perhaps the theology, or maybe a better way of saying it is, what theological resources do we have as Latter-day Saints for thinking about interfaith dialogue? So beyond just the doing of interfaith dialogue, the thinking about the why, perhaps the things that we can bring from the perspective of the restored gospel that motivate us to want to participate in interfaith dialogue, then perhaps there's some that are unique. And one of those, I think, is a unique perspective on the theology of religions. I'm guessing many of you are acquainted with this idea of the theology of religions, this idea of how to conceive of various religions in the world, especially from a Christian standpoint. And so typical points of view are pluralism, or an inclusivism or an exclusivism. A pluralism, sort of the all roads lead to God perspective. An inclusivism point of view that there may be anonymous Christians who just don't realize that they're following Christ, but their good works are sufficient for them. And then an exclusivism perspective, really emphasizing the exclusive path to salvation that Jesus Christ represents. And as in so many issues, Latter-day Saints don't neatly fall into any of these categories. And you've experienced this, you know this. In a lot of these categorizations, a lot of these classifications of religions, Latter-day Saints are not easily classified. And one of the things that I think is impressive and important is that we are somewhere in between all of this, and importantly so. So what I want to consider is this theology that we bring that motivates us in unique ways to be engaged in interreligious dialogue, and I think can therefore really prompt a robust, maybe more than I ever anticipated, conversations that are open, honest, and enriching. What I'd like to do first is just give a little bit of history of this at BYU. And so many of you know Truman Madsen, know that name. Truman Madsen was a pioneer in this effort, visionary, ahead of his time. For 20 years, he occupied an endowed professorship named for Elder Richard L. Evans. The professorship still exists. And he was fantastic at doing what he was charged to do by President Harold B. Lee, and that was to bring embers of, this was the metaphor that President Lee used, bring embers of BYU to others and then invite people to come to the bonfire that was at BYU. And he just was phenomenal. In his tradition, there have been a number of others, but Professor Robert Millett, who I know has spoken at this gathering on a number of occasions, he's another pioneer who in the year 2000 started a formal, regular dialogue with evangelical Christians that's been meeting semi-annually and is still is meeting today, and will have a culmination in the year 2020 when Professor Millett and his counterpart, Richard Mao, retire from this dialogue. And then about 4 years ago, thinking of all the things that Professor Millett had done at his retirement from BYU religion, there was an institutional group, a new institutional office created called the Office of Religious Outreach. A number of professors sit on this council and have launched some other regular dialogues. We now have a Latter-day Saint Jewish dialogue that meets semi-annually. We have a Latter-day Saint Church of the Nazarene dialogue, Church of the Nazarene, a Wesleyan tradition growing out of Methodism. We have just started a dialogue with Pentecostal Christians, and this November we'll launch one with Eastern Orthodox Christians. So some exciting things are happening. There's never been a time that I think where just more energy is being devoted to this. And so it makes us step back and say, well, how do we feel about this? How do we approach this? What, again, are the theological resources we have? And one more thing on background, and then we'll jump into the theology. I want us to think of one concrete example of the impact of interfaith dialogue. I'm going to guess many of you remember this. In October 2011, at the Values Voters Summit, so this was at the time when Mitt Romney was probably, I most assumed that he was going to be the Republican nominee for president. But at this Values Voter Summit, Pastor Robert Jeffress, he's pictured here with CNN's Anderson Cooper, he's a pastor in Dallas. He introduced Rick Perry, Texas governor, and endorsed Governor Perry. And in his opening remarks, Pastor Jeffress said that he always felt it was better to vote for a conservative Christian rather than a conservative non-Christian. And he never mentioned Mitt Romney by name, but it was pretty clear what he meant. And so as soon as he came off the stage, CNN was waiting for him, and they pressed him on this. And Pastor Jeffress, as you may remember, said, well, Mitt Romney belongs to a cult. Now, Latter-day Saints, I mean, this was not headline news. I mean, how many times have we heard this? But the thing that was remarkable to me was how it became headline news. And this is why I think you see that quote from Joanna Brooks, an observer and writer, Latter-day Saint, professor at San Diego State. She said about that moment, this was the moment when she felt like everything had changed. Something had changed in the 2012 campaign cycle that was not there in the 2008. And it seemed to be this unwillingness for journalists to let that cult label go without further investigation. And so Anderson Cooper, if you remember this interview, pressed Pastor Jeffress. And Pastor Jeffress said, well, they belong to a theological cult, not a sociological cult. And Anderson Cooper's complaint was, when most Americans hear the word cult, this calls up different kinds of images than the Latter-day Saints should be characterized. It was a really remarkable exchange. The thing that I found even more noteworthy was before the weekend was out, Richard Mao, who's pictured here, he was the president of Fuller Seminary and who had been the dialogue partner with Robert Millett for 15 years. He published an essay on CNN.com, and his title was, "My Take, This Evangelical Says Mormonism is Not a Cult." It was a powerful piece, and I think a really significant rejection that in a lot of ways changed the tenor of the whole conversation around Mitt Romney's religion. And what he said was, my evidence number one that Latter-day Saints are not a cult is that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is willing to engage in dialogue. And that line was striking to me because I don't know if I would have just been guessing what his evidence, piece number one would have been that. And that alone makes me think we should be motivated to engage in interfaith dialogue. That there's something about that very act of being willing to talk corrects major misconceptions. And I think we are seeing that and seeing the fruits of this. And so I'm so grateful to have followed Michael, and I admire so much of what public affairs does, and I think they model this for us. And so for that reason, I am really encouraged and feel motivated. So now let's talk about the theological resources. A couple of years ago, in 2014, the American Association of Atheists held their national convention here in Salt Lake City. And they reached out to a few of us at BYU to ask if we would come be on a panel discussion with them. It was an unforgettable evening. It was all that you would imagine it would be. All the things that we were afraid of happened, and all the things that we thought would be good come out of it, I think came out of it. I mean, it was just a remarkable exchange. They had told us that the reason they wanted this panel was, they said, we feel like atheists are often, there are a lot of misconceptions around atheists, and there are a lot of misconceptions around Mormons. We want to address both. And so we knew that coming out of the chute, the first question was going to be, what, as a Latter-day Saint, would you say is the number one misconception you want to correct? Well, boy, I mean, if you have that one chance to swing at that softball, what do you want to say? And so we knew that this would be the one question for sure that we would have a chance to respond to. And as we thought about it, that opening question, the thing that we wanted to say that I think just felt so strongly about is that Latter-day Saints, I think, are often misperceived as being exclusionary. And that, to me, was the misconception that I wanted to tackle first, is that because of our strong truth claims, too often, I think our theology, our religion, our culture, we are viewed as exclusionary. It couldn't have been a better setup than the Interfaith Fairfax, Virginia County director. Her comments, I think, represent that misperception. So what I think we can do is to change that view. And in fact, I think that view is theologically wrong. So here's Joseph Smith, through the filter of a great Latter-day Saint writer, Terrell Givens. What I think what's happening now in a lot of Latter-day Saint thinkers' writings is we're recapturing some of Joseph Smith's nuance about the apostasy. So let me read this. This comes from an epilogue of a book of essays about the apostasy, a fantastic collection called Standing Apart, published by Oxford University Press. And here's what Terrell Gibbons says. It is in this larger context that we need to take more seriously Smith's words. And so here he quotes Joseph Smith. If the Presbyterians have any truth, embrace that. If the Baptists and Methodists have truth, embrace that too. Get all the good in the world if you want to come out a pure Mormon. Elsewhere, he called it, quote, the first and fundamental principle of our holy religion to be free to embrace all and every item of truth without limitation or without being circumscribed or prohibited by the creeds or superstitious notions of men or by the dominations of one another. Joseph Smith again, we don't ask any people to throw away any good they have got. We only ask them to come and get more. So in this spirit, I think one of the first things we can do is take a more nuanced view of the apostasy. Here's Terrell Gibbons again, and I think this is what I mean by a paradigm shift for me. The grand project of restoration, then, relied upon a vision of apostasy as retreat and admixture rather than absence. So in a previous paragraph, Terrell Gibbons is contrasting Joseph Smith's work with the work of other restorationists, Alexander Campbell, for example, or Barton Stone, these other 19th century religious leaders, who their watch cry was anything that is not in the New Testament should be stripped away. They wanted to restore in the spirit of restoring a piece of furniture, to take off all of the lacquer, to take off everything that's been added. If it's not in the New Testament, we are not going to practice it. But Joseph Smith is coming at this differently. His task, back to Terrell Gibbons, his task would involve not just innovation or ex nihilo oracular pronouncements upon lost doctrines, but the salvaging, collecting, and assimilating of much that was mislaid, obscured, or neglected. Before we come to the last sentence, another paradigm shift for me that came in this is in the same essay, Terrell Gibbons points out that Joseph Smith in section 86 of the Doctrine and Covenants, this great apostasy section that talks about the priesthood restoration, alludes to the woman who fled into the wilderness, who was driven into the wilderness, this great apostasy symbol from the book of Revelation. But what he points out is something that gets overlooked too often, and I know I overlooked this in Revelation 12, verse 6. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. The revelation for me was that while the woman is in the wilderness, she's being fed, she's being nourished. And so therefore, Joseph Smith saw his work as salvaging, collecting, assimilating so much that the woman, the church, had been nourished with during this time. So let's go back to the last line. This is an important caveat. Space does not permit of elaborating one crucial caveat to this position. Like Fraser, another religious leader of his time, Joseph Smith believed that apostasy did involve the corruption beyond remedy of certain ordinances and covenants, and only the heavenly transmission of authority could recuperate those essentials. I think when we're able to separate truth and revelation and God working with people from the restoration of priesthood authority, our view of apostasy changes. We have a more nuanced view. And a statement that I'm guessing most of us are familiar with. This all of a sudden makes Come Alive, a 1978 statement. I'm sorry this is so small. I wanted to get the whole thing on here. I'll read it. Let's start with the second paragraph. The great religious leaders of the world, such as Muhammad, Confucius, and the Reformers, as well as philosophers, including Socrates, Plato, and others, received a portion of God's light. Moral truths were given to them by God to enlighten whole nations and to bring a higher level of understanding to individuals. If we have the faith then that our Heavenly Father has been enlightening and working with great religious leaders all over the world, then I think that makes us, perhaps as more than anyone, motivated to say, what are the truths we should seek? What are the things we can find from other religious traditions? Maybe two more quotes, and then I want to have some time to think of you, or hear what you think from what you've learned and what you feel about this. So here's, this is one of those quotes that I'm guessing you've had this experience where you just felt the ground kind of rumble beneath your feet because you just felt the earth moving when you thought of it in a new way. This was one of those earth-moving quotes for me. So we have Elder Ezra Taft Benson, who starts the quote, and then he's going to quote from Elder Orson F. Whitney. So we have this sort of double apostolic witness. So here's Elder Benson to start. God, the Father of us all, uses the men of the earth, especially good men, to accomplish his purposes. It has been true in the past, it is true today, it will be true in the future. And then here he moves to Elder Orson F. Whitney. Perhaps the Lord needs such men on the outside of his church to help it along, said the late Elder Orson F. Whitney of the Quorum of the 12. They are among its auxiliaries and can do more good for the cause where the Lord has placed them than anywhere else. Hence, some are drawn into the fold and receive a testimony of the truth, while others remain unconverted, the beauties and glories of the gospel being veiled temporarily from their view for a wise purpose. The Lord will open their eyes in his own due time. God is using more than one people for the accomplishment of his great and marvelous work. The Latter-day Saints cannot do it all. It is too vast, too arduous for any one people. We have no quarrel with the Gentiles. They are our partners in a certain sense. In that same vein, let's hear from Krister Stendahl, who a former dean of divinity at the Harvard Divinity School, the Bishop of Stockholm, a Lutheran bishop, and a defender when public outcry rose up against the church's desire to build a temple in Sweden. And he articulated on that occasion, in defense of the Latter-day Saints' proposed temple, his 3 rules for religious understanding. And he said, I think we should always learn about a religion from the very source, not from its competitors. Number 2, compare their best with your best and not your best with their worst. And finally, number 3, allow sufficient room for holy envy in finding things you wish you had or wish you did better. And in that beautiful spirit of holy envy, Krister Stendahl said to the assembled press conference that the thing he felt holy envy for that Latter-day Saints had was baptism for the dead. This beautiful desire to extend gospel or saving ordinances to ancestors. And Krister Stendahl ended up writing the entry on baptism for the dead for the Encyclopedia of Mormonism. So passionately did he feel about this. So this is where I think the paradigm shift comes for me, and that is this idea of a more nuanced view of the apostasy, this idea of God working with all peoples, this idea of truths being found in so many places, is that spirit of holy envy that interfaith dialogue is really fired by this simple statement at the bottom of this slide from Leonard Swidler at Temple University, an interfaith dialogue pioneer, when he says, dialogue fundamentally means I can learn from you. No question, all of us have probably felt motivated to talk in interfaith dialogue settings to increase understanding and to dispel misunderstandings on that people might have for Latter-day Saints. And that is a worthy, noble goal, and it is so crucial. But for me, interfaith dialogue changes when I come at it with that attitude, I can learn from you. And I think we're true to the spirit of Joseph Smith of coming out as true Mormons, as he said, when we want to gather all the truth wherever it's found. Okay, with that bit of sort of prefatory comments, I would love to spend our next 20 minutes together just hearing from you, your thoughts, your experiences. I think that probably most of us can hear, if you want to stand up and ask a question. Oh, we do have a microphone. Okay, great. We have a couple microphones. And what I would love is just how have you seen these practices in play? What have you found to be difficulties? What do you think for Latter-day Saints? What do you think that we can bring in interfaith dialogue? I mean, those are all on the table. I would just love to have you reflect on any of this.
Hey, Professor Haws, thanks for your 4 revisions on my final project.
That's right, yeah.
I appreciate the thoroughness.
Yeah, you were fantastic.
I have a hard time with other ministers who constantly think they know my religion more than I do, and I have a hard time just having them listen to what we actually believe, and then to filter that through what their bias already is, and still at the end of it, they still don't believe. They might believe that I'm a Christian, but they still are not convinced that we're all Christian. I'm like, I'm not an exception to your rule that I'm a non-Christian.
Yeah, that's
we're,
right.
We're all,
That's
there's
right.
like millions of us like me.
Yeah.
So how have you kind of helped that with others, kind of merge? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic question. And I would love to hear others' thoughts on this. This is a perennial problem, and I think the one that we constantly have to be sort of attacking. I think a lot of it kind of can come from how we set up these interfaith dialogues. If we come in with that sense of wanting to, the expressing explicitly that we want to learn from others. I've sometimes found a good way to come at this is to say, here are some things I have heard about your faith tradition, or here are some things that are commonly said. I want to know from someone who is in the tradition, where are we right, where are we wrong? I want to represent you fairly. And often that seems to generate a reciprocal response. So when you lead with that and say, this is what I'm hoping to represent you fairly, that comes back that way. Sometimes a less subtle approach works. I think you could say, in my experience, here are the ways that Latter-day Saints are represented unfairly. Do you hear these things? Have you heard these? And do you hold some of these? I think when we establish these kind of friendships, we can speak very candidly, and maybe it's building to that point of candor that is the one of our chief aims, so that we can sometimes tackle those directly. I've found what Michael said is too often true, is that we can be good at initial meetings, but the follow-up, the building of friendships, is tougher. Some of you probably find the advantage or maybe the difficulty of working closely with the same person who might hold some of these. But I think if you can establish that kind of give and take relationship that you say very honestly, I want to make sure we are representing your tradition. Here's how I feel like you can help represent mine. Then the other thing is that I don't think we do this often enough. This is even true in our academic dialogues. Is we don't invite people to our services enough. That's always a shock to me to find out from surveys that how little people know about what happens in Latter-day Saint chapels on Sundays. And so I think one of the best approaches to these questions of you being an outlier, you, a well-informed chaplain who is engaged in interfaith dialogue, that you're the exception. One of the best ways is to have them come to church meetings and to offer to do the same in that setting, so that they can come and see that that you are not unique. You're not an anomaly. You're representative of Latter-day Saints. You just run faster than most Latter-day Saints. So yeah. So, how about anyone else want to say anything on that very question, or do you want to do something else on that question? Yeah, please. Okay, yeah, please.
I'm Chaplain Training.
Should we wait for the microphone? Here comes the microphone. Yeah.
My name is Chaplain Hinkson. I served as a branch president in West Texas, and our missionaries came to me and was saying that no one will let them in. Most of it was predominantly Catholic, and so I called up the priest, and we had a meeting, and he was actually my age also, and so his name was Father Hatch. And so he said, I'd love to come to your office. And so we had a meeting, and I brought out he was having issues with the youth. And so I brought out our Strength of the Youth pamphlet, and we started talking. And then we had like an hour conversation or so. We're now friends on social media. And then actually what happened was the missionary, a whole bunch of other agents at my station came to me like, hey, Truman, we met your missionaries. And we've been feeding them for about a week now. Yeah. And they alternated them, and they helped us out. They served us, and we really liked them, and we want to learn a little bit more. And then Father Hatch came to our sacrament meetings. Wow. He started coming. He served in Fort Stockton in his parishes there.
Can you put the mic closer to your mouth?
Yes. So what happened was he started coming to our sacrament meetings. He asked if it was okay. And I said, yeah, our doors are open. And he would sit in the congregation with the missionaries. And then, so he'd go to his mass in Fort Stockton, the two different ones, and then he'd travel down to Sanderson, Texas, after our sacrament meeting. And then during that time, and then he would, one of the missionaries, he became really good friends with, and he comes to General Conference, and he wears his garb or whatever he wears, his priestly deals, and it's a forever friendship now. And now he's the head priest in Fort Stockton again. Wow. And he told the members of his mass, he said, be open to these young men, give them water. And they've been getting a lot more, they get into those homes a lot more, and more baptisms have been happening that way.
Fantastic. Incredible. Someone who wants to comment on that same issue? I want to make sure it looks like we have two more on that issue. And while you're, and back there.
I wanted to say that there's a difference between the theocracy of religion and the practice of religion. Mm-hmm. And where I'm coming from there is, for the last 5 years, my church assignment has been to be the church's representative for Colorado for anything to do with disaster response and recovery. When I first would raise my hand, say I represent the LDS Church in interfaith meetings, I saw the shields go up like they always do. Southern Baptist wouldn't shake my hand, all that kind of stuff. After I helped with wildfires and floods and worked shoulder to shoulder with the Methodists and the Mennonites and the Adventists and the Jehovah's Witness and the Baptist, we were best hugging friends. And not once in 5 years, in the literally thousands of hours that we've spent together doing emergency response and recovery, not once have I ever heard a debate about whether it's the Apostolic Creed or the Nicene Creed, whether the name of God is Jehovah, Elohim, Allah, or anything else, or baptism is by sprinkling or immersion or not required. Not once. It's always been, what can we do to help lift the burden off the shoulders of these people that just got hammered by this disaster and have lost everything? And it's been the most wonderful experience to me to build positive relationships throughout all the interfaith community, where we are brothers in Christ, whether they accept Christ or not, because we're all living the golden rule of helping others. Mm-hmm. And that is where our real power, I believe, comes in. The millennial flood that we had in Colorado in 2015, 8,000 members, LDS members, did 57,000 hours worth of flood recovery. And even the governor, who was negative on Mormonism and said so, all of a sudden became our friend of the church. What can we do to help you? And it changed the entire landscape. So again, it's the practice of religion rather than the theocracy of religion where I think our strength lies.
Thank you. While you're delivering the microphone, moments like this give openings for important conversations. So this is from a Q&A with a sociologist named Kendra Creasy Dean. She wrote a book called Almost Christian, which is a book that I would highly recommend. It's sort of a follow-up on Christian Smith's work on soul-searching about young people and religion and moralistic therapeutic deism that is kind of floating around. And she had a chapter in this book called Mormon Envy, just about how Latter-day Saint youth are in a different place. But here, she says something very interesting in this story. So she's kind of commenting on almost Christian, that we need to take that one step further to being for Christian theology. So she says, I was visiting a Methodist-affiliated college recently with my daughter, where the admissions counselor spent much of his presentation emphasizing that students should not be put off by the university's Christian affiliation, that in spite of it, we welcome everyone. I wanted to jump out of my chair. Who is training these admission counselors on Christian theology? And I love this line. It's because of our Christian identity that we welcome everyone. People who follow Jesus practice radical welcoming, but this is not the way Christianity is generally viewed. I think when we have these moments, as this good brother is describing, these become powerful moments to say it is because of Latter-day Saint theology, it's because of what we believe that we are motivated in this way, not in spite of it. And these become nice openings to have conversations to explain theology, to talk about how we feel about our relationship with God, how we feel about our relationship to each other, that become nice ways, nice natural entrees to talking about this. Okay, microphone's over here.
I was just going to share an experience recently. we had a group of women that were competing against our teenagers on a 24-hour scavenger hunt. And one of the things we had to do was do random acts of service. So we baked bread before this competition started. And we were just driving down the road, saw a woman walking towards a church, and we handed her a loaf of bread. Well, she invited us in to the church. It was an Episcopalian church. And the father was in there. And another thing we had to do on our list was ask a stranger to ask us to do something for a minute and do it. And so he said, let's pray together. And we did. And then he led us in a song. And that started a friendship because we then asked, do you have a women's group? And they do, called Daughters of Our King. And they invited us to come to their meeting first. I think they were trying to prove us, will we come to their meeting? And we did. And they asked us beforehand if we would share a few minutes of our faith, the tenets of our faith. And I said, how many? And she said, 20 to 30 is all. And I was like, well, okay. It was, 10 of us went, and it was such a spirit-filled, incredible experience. And when we finished, it was just really quiet in the room and tears. And one of the ladies said, how can we argue? The Spirit of Christ is here. And since then, they've invited us, we've invited them. Now we're sisters. We have a sisterhood with Episcopalian women, and it's been an incredible experience.
Fantastic. You know, the thing that I love about that, and I think this fits so much the spirit of what we're hearing Joseph Smith call us to, is that we should be proactive. I think when we model this kind of interest and curiosity in others, that's really sincere, when we really feel that feeling that I can learn from you, I think we're going to create openings for that to be reciprocated just by the spirit of seeing our sincerity, and I think generally people will respond to that sort of generous spirit. Are we in the middle here with the question, the microphone now? Okay, yeah.
Hello. Okay. Ryan Lewis. I'm an Army chaplain stationed at Fort Gordon, Georgia. So what I've found with interfaith dialogue, the easiest way to get it started is by asking questions.
Yeah.
So when I know that most of the mainstream Christian denominations want nothing to do with me, which is fine. There's a lot of outliers that are more than willing to talk to me. So some of my best friends in the chaplain corps are of other faiths. Like there's an Eastern Orthodox priest that our friendship, that he's now in Hawaii and we still stay in contact, and when he comes into the States, we try and meet up when we can. All started from me just asking him questions about Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
I knew a little bit from my mission in Ukraine, but I knew there was more I could learn. So I tried to go off of things that I kind of knew the answer to get the conversation going. And what I found is when you're asking questions, eventually people feel obligated to ask you questions.
Yeah.
And so I'll just keep asking him questions until he starts asking me questions about, well, tell me more about Mormonism, about this. And so at one point, I had him as a captive audience for about 2 hours as we're basically playing a ping pong match where he would ask me a couple questions, I would ask him a couple questions. And what we came out with at the end is Eastern Orthodoxy and Mormonism are fairly close. So at the end of the conversation, he said, I'll make you a deal. When I die, you baptize me. When you die, I'll chrismate you.
Yeah.
So that way we've got us both covered.
That's great. That's fantastic. Okay, see, you have reached the spot. I mean, that's just the sweet spot, I think, when you have that kind of relationship. And I think you've identified, again, that feeling of genuine curiosity when it's more than just trying to get our points across, when we are genuinely curious about others because we recognize they have truths and holy things that we can express holy envy for. One thing that we have found helpful in our dialogues is, and sometimes depending on the situation, you might want to make these more formal, or they might be better more informal, but is picking a topic that you have mutual interest in. And a great place to start are in lived religion sort of topics, religious sort of worship practice, how does this religion affect you at home? Those are wonderful places to start. These kind of question and answers, whether formal or informal, I think that kind of curiosity bears great fruit. Thanks for sharing that. Down here in the middle. Oh, we've got one in the back, and then maybe we can bring this microphone down here in the middle. Okay. 5 minutes?
Hi, JB, Jason Olson.
Hi, Jason. Good to see you again.
You too. I'm thinking very practically about this and would love for your recommendations for all of us here that are working right in this field. I think for me, my greatest concern in needing to do interfaith dialogue is I've got chaplains of other faith groups on a ship or in Iraq or Afghanistan, and they've got Latter-day Saints in their units.
Right.
And they're my Latter-day Saints chaplain. And so I need to engage in interfaith dialogue with them because I need them to understand my Latter-day Saints who they're taking care of.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that they're taking care of my people right, and that they're understanding and they're not dishonoring or ridiculing or just neglecting or ignoring, because I have young Latter-day Saints out deployed, and they need a chaplain too. And we can't be everywhere at every time.
Yeah.
As Latter-day Saint chaplains. We need the other chaplains to understand us and work with us. So how do you recommend we broach that more effectively so that we can make that point? How would a chaplain of another faith group take care of our Latter-day Saints?
Well, that's a fantastic question, and you all are probably better qualified to answer that because of your own work situations and settings. But I think it seems to me that these conversations always go better when we're very straightforward. And so I could imagine you even saying what you just said, saying, I want to be of most service to you. What can I offer to you so that you can feel comfortable serving the Latter-day Saints who are under your charge? And I think that kind of offer of making yourself available, my guess is that would go over very, very well. And I think when we express our own sense of, I have felt nervous in situations where I've been, the shoe's been on the other foot, so I want to do all I can to help you. And I think being an initiator and not being shy about expressing that seems to go over so well. I think that all of us feel in these interfaith situations that we're a little nervous about making missteps. So I could see you just saying what you just said and offering your services would probably be well received, really well received. The other thing I think we can do is we can make resources available that might seem less threatening, readings that we enjoy or websites. That seems to be a nice spot, a nice way to come at it. I think we probably only have time for one more question. Did the microphone make it to you? Or okay, yeah.
I'm Carrie Riker, and I'm a hospice chaplain here in Salt Lake.
Great,
And
Carrie.
something I run into frequently is people who are a different religion other than the member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they've felt excluded.
Yeah.
Or people who were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and then took a different path in their life, and then they felt shunned.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was interesting what you said about the church, our church not being one of exclusivity. However, the culture has been one of exclusivity. And so I'm wondering how to address that when we talk with other people to help them understand that this is not a doctrine that we're exclusive, but that we are inclusive, and how to kind of help people process and heal when they've experienced something like that.
Well, profound question. Maybe a two-pronged approach, and then I think you've left us with a lot of things to think about. I think on the one hand, what we can do is I don't think we need to be shy about apologizing for that people in our faith have made mistakes. I think we can take President Uchtdorf's example in 2013, his talk, "Come Join With Us," is just, frankly, leaders and members of the church have made mistakes. And we have Elder Ballard, who has on a number of occasions has really spoken strongly against that kind of attitude. And I think that might soften some of the blows when you talk with people that say, this is not what our apostles are saying, and we have fallen short, but this is not what our apostles are saying. And to I think, express that kind of sorrow and regret that we haven't lived up to it. The other prong I think we can do is in our congregations, I think we can have a profound effect. You all can have a profound effect on Latter-day Saints in maybe changing congregational culture, is that you can talk about your experiences. I mean, to hear about all of you who are having experiences with people of other faith, think how that broadens the views of the young men and young women that you advise on Sundays, or the sacrament congregations that you get to hear your experiences. We can talk about these principles to strengthen and recapture so much of the spirit of this from Joseph Smith. So I think we can have an impact just by sharing who we are, both with people who have been wounded and to offer an alternate view, and then with members of the church that we associate with to expand their viewpoint, this kind of paradigm shift. This was a good place to end on these two last quotes. I'm struck by the Nauvoo house. The saints have been driven out of Missouri. They've been, the extermination order, and the revelation that comes now, section 124 of the Doctrine and Covenants, commands them to build a hotel. Not a fortress, not a castle wall, but a hotel. There's this sense that we want to welcome people in, to come and see. And so in maybe the spirit of that, this quote from President Hinckley, "Let us love the Lord, yes, with all our strength and power, and let us also love our neighbors. Let us banish from our lives any elements of self-righteousness. Many regard us with suspicion as having only one interest, and that is to convert them. Conversion is more likely to come as a consequence of love. Let us be friendly, let us be helpful, let us live the golden rule. Let us be neighbors, or chaplains, or interfaith dialogue participants, of whom it might be said, he or she was the best neighbor I ever had." Well, what is something to aspire to? And then back to Kendra Kishuddin, this last sentence. The more intentionally we pattern our lives after Christ, the more we genuinely extend ourselves for people who are different from us. That is what the New Testament church was all about, which I take to be the prototype of churches even today. I think there's a profound call in both these ways that we want to be around people who are different than us, both for what we can learn and our chances to love them, to be the best neighbor he or she ever had. I feel that call from our prophets and from our Savior. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.